Blood on the Bayous is supported in part by Dr. B.B. Trotter from Abilene, Texas, and the Fort Butler Foundation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Don Frazier, and the story continues about the Civil War in Louisiana and Texas. Richard Taylor may have come to Louisiana to right the situation on behalf of the Confederate government, but he was going to get a very clear signal that the Federals knew he was back in the neighborhood. On August 28th, Benjamin Butler dispatched the 8th Vermont to pay a visit to Richard Taylor's home, Fashion Plantation, in St. Charles Parish. Here, the Vermonters ransacked the place. Not only did they ransack the place, but they went through all the personal belongings of the former president, Zachary Taylor, Richard Taylor's dad. They gathered up papers from his presidential tenure and also his time in the Army, carried away his sword that he carried all the way through the war with Mexico, and essentially caused the paper trail of President Zachary Taylor to essentially vaporize as plunder of war. They not only took the personal possessions from the plantation, but all the livestock, all of the enslaved people there also left with the Army. They even went into the barn and killed Richard Taylor's children's pets, their ponies. Killed those horses, skinned them, and then tacked those hides up to the side of the barn just out of spite. These Vermonters then paid a visit to several other abandoned plantations and also picked up additional plunder from those locations and marched back to Booty Station. Their plunder train was 3 miles long. Very clearly, they're telling the folks in that part of Louisiana, if you do not comply, if you do not come into New Orleans and sign the loyalty oath, you're going to get a visit very much like this. Taylor is resigned to the fact that he will have to make sacrifices in order to bring about Southern independence, to actually create the Confederate States of America, which looks good on paper at this point, but on the ground it's still pretty shaky in Louisiana. So he starts to see what he has in inventory to take the war to the Federals. Well, there has been one battalion of cavalry come in from Texas. That is Ed Waller's 11th Texas Cavalry Battalion. Now, these guys claim that they're Texas Rangers, but really they're very, very green and inexperienced teenagers that are out on an adventure. But even so, they look ferocious on the march, so maybe they'll fight ferociously as well. There's also word that there are regiments coming from the various armies in Tennessee and Alabama that are going to come back to Louisiana where they were raised, refit, and join Taylor's army. This includes the 18th Louisiana Infantry, the Creole Regiment, which was raised largely in the sugar parishes and down in New Orleans, but also the 24th Crescent Regiment, which is also a product of New Orleans. Essentially, Taylor likes these regiments because they're raised in regions that are already occupied by the Federals. So they'll have some motivation to strike back at the enemy, but they're not ready yet. Valsin Foray's 10th Louisiana Battalion, the Yellow Jackets, largely Cajuns from St. Martinville in New Iberia, are not militarily robust. Can't really rely on them. He's trying to stiffen them up by putting some additional troops that are not from that region into the regiment, but the experiment is not going well. Turns out, northern Louisianans and folks from Orleans Parish, New Orleanians, do not mix well with people from Acadiana when it comes to military organizations. So really what he has is the 2nd Louisiana Cavalry, then forming, and Waller's Texas Battalion, 2 mounted units, and the various militias from the sugar parishes. St. John the Baptist, St. St. James Parish Militia, the Terrebonne Parish Militia, St. Charles Parish Militia, theoretically, the Assumption Parish and the Ascension Parish militias. Perhaps they can be used to at least strike back. He comes up with a plan. He will take these militias, stiffened by the 2nd Louisiana Cavalry, or at least what will become the 2nd Louisiana Cavalry. At this point, it's McWater's battalion. And they will launch a raid from an unexpected direction against Booty Station. They will be followed by Waller's Texas Battalion. So these ferocious Texans will then add their weight to this offensive. The plan is to leave Thibodaux, cut a road, reinforce a road, improve a road through the Chack Bay Swamp, all the way to the Mississippi River Levee Road. There they'll hook a sharp right, head on down the river to St. Charles Courthouse, and then take the back road to Booty Station. They'll surprise and ambush whatever is garrisoning Booty Station, and thus cut the railroad connecting New Orleans with Bayous des Allemands, which is the advanced Union post. So not only will they gobble up the Union garrison at Booty, but they'll also trap the Union garrison at des Allemands. The plan looks like it's going to go off without a hitch. He puts a militia general, General Pratt, in charge of the Louisiana militia, and they take the lead. Now, the Texan commander, Ed Waller, lieutenant colonel, is going, well, why am I not in charge of this expedition? I'm a Confederate officer. He is a mere general of militia. So already there's some animosity, even when there's a Confederate operation at the smallest of scales. Even so, Pratt ignores the controversy and leads the way, and they burst out into the open at Booty Station on September 4th. Nobody's there. So Pratt looks around to the end of his column and says, all right, where's Waller? Nobody knows. He's supposed to be following hard on the heels of Pratt's guys. He's nowhere to be seen. Well, what Waller has done is gotten to St. Charles Parish and then told everybody to kind of, let's take it easy for a day or two, set up some camps. We can see what's going on the Mississippi River. He might have been nursing a grudge. He might have been pounding, sulking, who knows. But part of what happens while they're loitering around in St. Charles Parish is his guys are shooting at shipping that are going down the Mississippi towards New Orleans. So guess what the crews of these ships, these schooners, these steamboats, report when they get to New Orleans? Hey, there's some knuckleheads on the levee back there at St. Charles Parish that are taking shots at us. So immediately the Federals go, wait, something is up. I wonder what's going on up there in St. Charles Parish. So that focuses Union attention that direction. Unintended consequence, but it's certainly what the Texans bring about. Back at Booty Station, Pratt's wondering where Waller has disappeared to, and then he catches word that there is a supply train coming up the tracks from New Orleans bound for des Allemands. The usual routine is for an escort train to leave des Allemands, meet the ration and resource train coming from New Orleans at Booty Station, and then they go together all the way to des Allemands to guard against guerrillas and interception. So now Pratt has a problem. Clearly there's about to be a lot of Federals gathering at Booty Station. He needs to spring an ambush. Where's Waller? Well, he can't wait on him. Pratt prepares the battlefield by throwing a bunch of switches on the tracks so that the train full of troops coming from des Allemands will be shunted off to a siding. And hopefully, by flipping the switch on the other end, the ration train will also hit that siding and there'll be a big train wreck. That's the idea. So train wreck and then pounce on the people that are coming out of the rubble. The Federal troops from des Allemands arrive first. And as they're coming into Booty Station, they start taking fire. And they're going, wait, we're in an ambush. One of their number, a fellow in the 8th Vermont by the name of Ingalls, looks down the track and sees that the switch has been thrown. So he jumps from the train, races down the tracks ahead of the train, which is busy putting the brakes on, and throws that switch just in time for the train to pass by the siding and have a clear road off to New Orleans. Ingalls is shot several times, manages to climb back on the train, and away they go and make their escape. Even so, there's 12 Vermonters that have been killed in this ambush. So Pratt has missed his quarry, but he has now sent this detachment towards New Orleans, and the Federals at Des Allemands are still cut off. So Pratt burns Booty Station and then goes down the tracks to Des Allemands, and the Union troops there go, we're outnumbered, we're a long way from New Orleans, we give up. And he captures about 160 men there. Pratt then very wisely scoots on down the tracks towards Thibodaux. As he is making that march, some of the militiamen start noticing that men in the 8th Vermont look awfully familiar. Turns out, some of the Unionists in the sugar parishes had joined the 8th Vermont to try to avoid Confederate conscription. 6 of these men are hauled off to the side of the tracks, forced to dig their own graves, and are shot dead. Clearly, if you are going to oppose the Confederacy in the sugar parishes, you can expect a bullet. So what of Waller? Well, Waller shows up the next day. He shows up on September 5th and goes, wait, who burned the station? How come everything's all shot up? His men kind of sift through the ashes, see if there's anything they can plunder. And then Waller, instead of going down the tracks towards Thibodaux, very foolishly turns around and heads back to St. Charles Parish and St. Charles Courthouse. And the Payne Plantation is where his men encamp. By this time, the Federals are fully aware of what's going on. First thing that Benjamin Butler does is tell the survivors of the 8th Vermont, get on a train, go down the tracks, and retrieve your honor. So the 8th Vermont does exactly as they're told, snap to it, they get on a train, that train leaves New Orleans, and a few miles outside of town, bam, they run into a cow, and the cow derails the train. So the 8th Vermont is really out of action. Well, Butler's going, now how do I get at them? Wait, I wonder if those guys up in St. Charles Parish are still there. Butler's going to take 5 regiments and a battery of artillery, along with the USS Mississippi and 3 other gunboats, upstream. He's going to drop part of that force below St. Charles Courthouse, downriver from it, and then send the other part of this force to a bend in the river called Bonnet Carré. Bonnet Carré Bend will be the landing force that will block any sort of Confederate retreat, while the force downstream moves up and essentially squeezes them. Waller's men are largely ignorant that this is afoot. They actually have some scouts that can see that the Federal troops in New Orleans are moving about, but they don't really understand the depth of their danger. When they wake up on September 8th, they find out that the Federals have arrived. So the Texans say, great, we'll just go down there and we'll rough them up. As they ride towards the Federals that are at Bonnet Carré, the Federals unleash a volley on them and drop a couple of the Texans. The Texans go, whoa, and they also have artillery. We don't have that. They've got the range, they've got the punch, we don't. We'd better back up. So they fall back towards St. Charles Courthouse. What do they discover? The other blocking force. So now they are hemmed in above and below. The only way out is they have to head towards the swamps, back away from the river. Texans get their horses, charge off into the swamps, and pretty quickly they're up to their withers in mud and muck. So now the Texans are going, well, our horses are bogged down in this mire. All of our heavy equipment is here. It's sinking in the mud. The Texans dismount and just kind of bushwhack their way back into the swamp and get away. But they leave all of their horses and all of their equipment. Essentially, Waller's Texas Cavalry Battalion is rendered militarily inert by this battle at Bonnet Carré. Well, Taylor's still going to claim victory. They have picked off these 2 Union outposts, Booty Station and the outpost at Des Allemands, the bridge over Bayous Des Allemands. And now he moves to try to gather in the rest of the timid militia. He sends the 2nd Louisiana Cavalry up to Donaldsonville, and there they send word that the Ascension Parish Militia, which had not really turned out when called, should gather and present themselves ready for action. They refuse. The 2nd Louisiana Cavalry says, "We'll come get you then." And the Ascension Parish Militia says, "Bring it on." And in fact, they swap shots. 2 Confederates are killed. The Ascension Parish Militia dissolves into the swamps and canebrakes. And so clearly, Confederate occupation of the sugar parishes is not universally popular. While that is going on, the Federals understand that they need to project power back into that region as well. On September 11th, the 21st Indiana, our old friends, land at Donaldsonville and begin to ransack the town. They not only take off produce, sugar, they also take off Unionists. And I assure you that many of the Unionists that they carry off were probably members of the Ascension Parish Militia. Taylor has his work cut out for him in the sugar parishes.